Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com. And this is the first in a series of videos that I want to do that I'm going to call the Developer Diaries for Ravage Star. But it's going to serve two purposes. One, I want to talk about rules development for Ravage Star, the tabletop game that I've been working on and that I continue to work on. But the second is also like a general discussion of rules design. So if you've ever wanted to design your own rules, then these videos might be helpful for you. And also, I'd love to get feedback, so maybe there's three purposes of these, as we talk about the various subjects of what I'm going to cover, so that we can maybe get to the best possible rules for Ravage Star. So let's talk about that first. Are there a best possible set of rules? In this video specifically, I want to talk about activation systems. Which activation system is the best? Now, you're welcome to leave a comment at any point in the video, and then leave replies to your comment as you want to add thoughts to it. I would love all the feedback. I've been getting a tremendous amount of feedback ever since I posted the early alpha rules for Ravage Star. A lot of positive stuff and a lot of suggestions as well. And I love that because some of the suggestions have been really good. I'm not saying that a lot of suggestions aren't good, but it's more that a lot of them don't fit into what it is I'm trying to do. So before we get really talking about which activation system is best, you have to understand that that's almost it's not a correct question to ask, because there is not going to be a perfect answer for everything that you're doing. If I were designing a skirmish style game, in other words, a game where you only have like 5 to 10 miniatures on each side for, let's say, a post-apocalyptic setting that focused on a horrific zombie uprising that everybody is terrified of, and almost like a spectral ghost-like thing, so there's ghosts coming out and everything, then I would want to consider how the psychological part of the game is going to factor in to each aspect of the game. I might include actual, like, way more detailed morale system than you typically see in games. I might include a lot more lighting things, so that the battlefield, how well lit it is in the different areas. I might include weapon jamming to be a regular thing. I might include the activation system needs to be so stupidly random because you really have no idea what's going on. All of these things would factor into what I am trying to accomplish. And then on the other side, if I wanted to create a game like along the scale of Warhammer 40K, where you have possibly 100 plus models on the table, all of those things would slow the game down to the point where it wouldn't be even fun. And so you have to consider what it is you're trying to accomplish. What's the genre that you're doing? What's the theme within that genre? Like Marvel Crisis Protocol is a great game, and it has a really interesting system that as you take damage or do damage, you build up, I can't remember what it's called, rage or something, and then you can use those, or power, and then you can use those power tokens to then activate really cool abilities. Well, that's really good for superhero stuff, but can you imagine Warhammer 40K or Age of Sigmar using something like that? You might think, well, that would be really cool. You'd have 1 million tokens on the table. You'd have to try to keep track of so many new rules, and it wouldn't work. So what works for one game doesn't necessarily work for the other. So activation systems are the same. I remember when Dave put up a poll a while ago, what activation system should Ravage Star have? I go, you go, or alternate activation? And by far, alternate activation won that vote. But I ask, what is alternate activation? Is it really better than I go, you go? You might scream at the camera, absolutely, it is way better. And yet, Warhammer 40K and Age of Sigmar are best-selling games. And you might think, well, that's not fair. Games Workshop has been around forever. And so they've got kind of that grandfathered in, just like how Dungeons & Dragons sells really well, even though it's not necessarily the best role-playing system. And I'd say, yeah, you're absolutely right. But you don't know exactly how much that all influences it. Because as much as that's been happening, Games Workshop continues to flourish. They're not slowly declining to death as other companies take their place. And maybe it's because the models are good enough to make up for it, or maybe it is because the game is actually fun with all of its flaws. I don't actually have the answer. I don't know. All I know is that Games Workshop has worked really hard to keep an I go, you go system where, we'll throw in things like reactions. We'll throw in things like when we're in close combat, things actually go back and forth a bit more. We'll throw in like stratagems for Overwatch or for defensive posturing or whatever it happens to be. And they keep working towards that. Or in the cases of Age of Sigmar, we'll throw in random turns so you don't know who's going next necessarily. So whether these are good or bad, I can't say. All I know is that they made a game that a lot of people play. Alternate activation in its purest form, I think, is actually a much worse system. And that is, if you're not familiar with the terms, alternate activation just means I activate a unit and complete whatever it does, and then you activate a unit and complete whatever it does. You might think, yeah, that's way better because then both players get to kind of go back and forth. But if you play enough games, and I have, with alternate activation and nothing else, like Warcry, for example, really, really fun little skirmish game that Games Workshop came out with. It's alternate activations. And it all seemed fun until I had an opponent who figured something out. And that is that they always made sure to spam a bunch of super cheap units. And so what would happen in the game of Warcry, where shooting is not a big thing and getting close is, and you're a really small table, is when it was his turn, he would take one of those really cheap guys and activate it and say, he's not going to do anything. He's just going to stay at the back. And then I'd go with something important. And then he'd go and say, well, I'll activate this other nobody. And he'd have enough nobodies that pretty much my whole warband would be done activating before anything on his end that was important would go. Now you might think, well, Matthew, it's because you didn't do your list building properly. It's like, well, sure. So now everybody's list has to be the same. They all have to bring a bunch of spammed crap, and then a few elites. Well, I don't want that. I want to be able to bring just 5 big orc brutes and be able to fight that game. And I can't. I have to bring a bunch of little guys just to play it. So I can't play it the way I want to. And you might think, well, that's your fault, not the game's. And you're not wrong, necessarily. In fact, there is an alternate activation game out there that is almost perfectly balanced. Almost. And that is chess. And even as the game goes on and you have a different number of pieces, it doesn't matter. Because in that game, it doesn't actually have alternate activation completely, because it lets you activate whichever unit you want over and over and over again. So you can have the same piece go over and over and over again. So that's an interesting system in and of itself. Play alternate activation where you never have your turns. It's just activate whatever you want. Now that I said that out loud, I'm like, huh, that's actually kind of cool. Not for Ravage Star, but I might try to make a skirmish game that is goes around the concept, because we're so used to the idea of game rounds. What if there wasn't a game round? What if it was like chess, that you just activated whatever you wanted and the game just went on until certain victory conditions were met or a certain amount of time passed or something? Well, that's pretty cool. But alternate activation in its basis form has its own flaws too. And so then we have other systems like token pulling or dice pulling. I play bolt action, where you have a bag and you both throw in the colored dice for your army. And that's it. There's nothing special about them. If I have 5 units, I put 5 of my dice in. If you've got 7 units, you put 7 of yours in. The nice thing about dice pulling is if I have twice as many guys as you because I spammed guys, then I'm more likely to pull my dice. And so I'm not going to have that whole, well, most likely I'll be, you're forced to finish your turn before most of my guys have gone. But that has its flaws as well. First off, it's incredibly random. If you've ever played that game enough, you have those games where somebody pulls 5, 6 of their own tokens in a row, and it feels a little unfair. Or even worse, in the first turn, you're the one that pulls 5 or 6 tokens of your own because you're far away and now you have to expose yourself. Also, because you can activate whatever you want, the person who activates something last could activate something powerful, bring it out of cover and take its shots. And then in the next turn, if they get lucky enough to pull one of their dice, they can activate that same thing again, take a shot, and maybe hide. Now, I don't think you can necessarily do that in bolt action. But the idea is that something powerful could double activate and make a big difference in the game. So that has its flaws. Judge Dredd does a similar alternate activation, but they throw in a special token that when you activate a unit, if you then pass a cool check, you can put that token back in the bag and then reactivate that unit. That's really cool because that allows for a warband that has a lot of regular dudes and their cool checks rarely pass. And then you get Judge Dredd on the other side, who's the only guy on the table. He's got a really good cool check, and so he can keep passing it and keep activating over and over again until the game round is over. That's pretty cool too. That actually inspired some of the boost mechanics for Ravage Star. And then you get Star Wars Legion, who's like, well, we'll do an alternate activation, but we'll have a command phase where you can control it a bit more. So we're going to have it so that you don't just get to activate anything. You have to activate whatever token comes up, whether it's a troop or an elite or a vehicle or whatever it happens to be. But in the command phase, you can control that a little bit. And I found that that was a cool system, but it allowed too much control. And so it just turned into a hyper-competitive game. And it's a great game, don't get me wrong. But it's just like, I don't want to have that perfect control of my army because I find that that means I can't be as casual with the game. I want to just have a fun narrative game, and as soon as I have like perfect control of everything, that doesn't happen. So I can keep going on with different activation systems, but we keep talking about it like it's I go, you go versus alternate activations. And it's really, those aren't the only two choices. Games Workshop has shown that they've come up with different ways to deal with I go, you go, from reactions to how the fighting in close combat works, as that's usually back and forth, to other things as well. Games like Infinity. Infinity is a wonderful game. It's really, really fun. And that is an I go, you go game, but not really, because every time you activate a unit and move it or do anything with it, any opponent, any enemy units that can see it can actually react and move out of the way, dodge, or they can even fire at them. And it has a really interesting, it's always your turn kind of feel to it. And so you have to make sure there's a lot of terrain on the table to make up for the fact that otherwise the game doesn't work. But I loved playing Infinity. It's been a while since I played it, but I demoed it again last Adepticon. I'm like, oh yeah, I just loved this game so much. Just all these games that I've had such a fond memory of playing. And all of them had their flaws, and have their flaws. None of them are perfect. And so I actually am of the opinion that if I had to go for pure alternate activation or pure I go, you go, I would go I go, you go all the time. Just because pure alternate activation does not work in pretty much every game that I've ever played it in. It's usually some sort of more random activation, or, like you play Battletech, and if I've got 4 mechs and you've got 2, well then 2 of my guys activate and 1 of yours, and 2 of mine and 1 of yours. And that game on top of that has damage all allocated at the same time. So even though I'm going and shooting, the damage is done at the end of the phase. So you have to keep track of what's been damaged and what's not. And that's okay for a game that only has a few models on the table. But once you have lots of models on the table, you're going to need tons of tokens all over. Apocalypse, 40K Apocalypse does that. They have an I go, you go kind of, but it's also alternate activation. It's more alternate activation, but you activate entire detachments and you do stuff with them, but you mark all the damage and then you resolve all the damage at the same time. And that's cool. That really works. I actually really enjoyed that game. And so there are so many options. So I want you to kind of, there's one thing I think I want everybody to agree on. I want you to agree on that there's not a perfect answer to this, because every system, every game is trying to accomplish something slightly different. And if you don't think that, if you think, no, every game needs to accomplish the same thing, then maybe just don't be part of this discussion, because we're just never going to agree. We're never going to agree that there is one perfect gaming system out there. There is not. There has to be tailor-made to what you're trying to accomplish as a rules writer, and what you want to focus on. And in the end, that is what is most important. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What do you think, when you look at Ravage Star? So if you're not familiar with what Ravage Star is, we're about to launch, we're about to launch when this video goes out. I think it's about a week away. On November 7th, we're launching our second Game Found campaign. The first was for the Veil Touch miniatures. And that wasn't as part of a game. They were just really nice looking miniatures that you could use in games like Warhammer 40K or in other things or in one-page rules or wherever you wanted to, or you just wanted to collect them and paint them, then that's fine too. But now we're actually making our own game. We've got 2 factions that we've come out with, the Gorkog and the Amari. That's the Space Bugs and Space Dwarves, not meant to be proxies for Tyranids and Votan. They actually aren't a one-to-one that you can claim that they are or not, but I can tell you that they were not designed with that in mind. They were just designed to create a really cool Space Bug race and a really cool Space Dwarf race. And we decided we want to make our own game out of this, not just make miniatures. And so I've been working on that. It's going to take a few months to develop the rules, and that's fine because it's going to take that long before we have to go to publishing for the book, even though the campaign is next week, because it's going to take roughly a year to fulfill at least the first wave. And so that campaign is going, and I hope we can get your support. At the very least, you can go to the campaign link, and if you follow it before the campaign, you get a free miniature if you back the campaign. So that miniature is only available for free during the campaign. Afterwards, you have to pay for it. So you can go, at the very least, just click follow, so that if you decide that you're going to back it, that you'll get that. So that campaign's happening next week. And so I'm developing the rules for it. And so I would say it's similar, if you want to make a comparison, because most of our audience here plays Warhammer 40K or Age of Sigmar. The size of the game will be comparable to 1,000 points of Warhammer. The typical game. You're, of course, allowed to play it at any scale. In fact, I'm going to write rules for different scales so that you can scale it up and have different scenarios and slightly different rules, and you can scale it down and actually have more crunchy rules that will not be available in the regular size game. So I plan on doing all of that. And I'm having a lot of fun doing the rules, and we've already done a lot of play testing, and I'm really happy where they're going, but we're still a long ways away from a polished game. And so right now is the perfect time for you to give feedback. So we've already posted a couple of playtest battle reports. I'll put links in the battle report. or in the description. And we'll have more playtest battle reports coming out this week and over the next couple of weeks. So I want your comments on that. But here's where you can really make the difference. We also have a link to a Discord server where you can talk about the Ravage Star rules. But what do you think? When we're trying to create a rule set where it's supposed to be nice, quick, fast-paced, back and forth, roughly 1,000 points of Warhammer 40k size game, if you look at the number of squads, the number of models on the table, and the idea is that it's narrative and it flows back and forth, but you don't have complete control. There's a chaos to it. There's a fog of war to it. What would you do? What would you want the Ravage Star rules to look like? So I invite you to read the rules that we've already posted, to watch those games, and to post your thoughts here or wherever else. I'm reading every comment everywhere. Yeah, I don't respond to all of them. I'm going to use videos for that. But I'm definitely reading every Discord comment, every YouTube comment, every comment on Reddit. I've been following those places. Every comment on our GameFound campaign. You leave them somewhere, and I guarantee that I will read it. So do that for me. So leave that below. We're going to talk more in future episodes of Developer Diaries for Ravage Star. I'll kind of tackle different areas, sore spots for many people in the miniature games that we play and love. So stay tuned for that. This is Matthew from MiniWarGaming. Happy Wargaming.